Hey, so welcome back to the Flow Tribe podcast, where I get to interview the movers, breathers, teachers, and healers of the world. So my guest today is Valéry Brosseau. So I'm going to start by reading her bio, and then I'll tell you a little bit more about Valéry. So Valéry Brosseau is a passionate speaker, writer, and mental health advocate. Her lived experience with mental illness has taken her on a journey to combat stigma through mental health awareness. So I've known Valéry for many years. I met Valéry years ago in Montreal when I was teaching Muay Thai and she was a student of mine. As happens, we both went on our separate journeys, and I reconnected with Valéry recently when I found out about the work that she's been doing. This was a really important conversation for me. Mental health is something that I've become more and more involved with, especially mental health awareness, advocacy, and trying to find solutions and support for people with mental health issues. So if you want to learn more about mental health awareness, mental health advocacy, and learn more about Valéry's journey and the work that she does, I highly recommend this episode. It was probably one of the more important ones that I've had an opportunity to be a part of so far. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Valéry Brosseau. Okay, so Valéry, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today. And so why don't we start by having you introduce yourself, let people know who you are and what you do.
Sounds good. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited about this conversation. I'm always stoked when anybody wants to dedicate some time to mental health because that is my passion, my jam, and my career. And I've been very, very lucky to be able to do something that I'm so passionate about. And that stems from lived experience. So I didn't happen onto mental health just by accident. It's something that I've lived, that I've really experienced, and that I've wanted to use to a positive purpose, to give positive meaning to the things that I've experienced. So I know we'll delve into all of that in more detail, but I grew up with mental illness, and it presented me with a lot of challenges, a lot of struggles, and it's been a huge learning experience and journey of growth and learning about myself and finding self-awareness and finding the right tools. And in taking on that journey, I realized that I could use that to help others. So now I work in mental health. I am a speaker, so I do speaking engagements, workshops, talks, that kind of thing. I also work with clients one on one, providing support, which to me is sort of like peer support plus. It's educated and trained support, but also from someone who is a peer, who's lived it, who's been there before. So that's what's unique about the work that I do with my one on one clients. It is not the work of a therapist, it is not that of a psychologist. It's somebody who focuses on concrete tools and strategies from the point of view of someone who's lived it and who has used those strategies. So that's sort of the two sides of my business at the moment, which, like I said, all stem from what I've lived through and wanting to give really positive meaning to that.
That's amazing. And so let's start from when you said you grew up with mental illness. So, full disclosure to people listening, we know each other from many years ago, where you were a student of mine in some of my Muay Thai classes. You also did some Brazilian Jiu Jitsu at the gym where I was teaching. And at the time, I knew nothing about any mental illness issues, and I mean, we didn't know each other very well, but well enough. And
Yeah.
so, but I think that's the thing, right? Is most people who are dealing with some sort of mental health issue or mental illness, a lot of it is internal. A lot of it is internalized. Very little of it is shared with the people around them. And I think that's a big part of the problem, right? It's the difficulty sometimes that we have in talking about these things, which makes people not want to talk about those things. And so maybe you could dive into that. Like you say, you grew up with mental illness. Could you be more specific as to what that is and what that looked like?
Absolutely. It's very true that we learn to put on a facade, not only because mental illness can be viewed as weakness, but also because it's misunderstood. There's stigma surrounding it, and people don't want to have those open and honest conversations. And often when I speak to students in schools, one of the things that I like to start with is, do I look like somebody who's mentally ill? Would you pick me out on the bus and think this person has a mental illness? And almost unequivocally, the answer is always no, of course you don't. And I use that as a conversation starter to talk about the fact that there is no face of mental illness. There is no one behavior that demonstrates that somebody has a mental illness. It could be your teacher, your brother, your neighbor. anybody in your life could have been faced with mental health concerns. And it's not, yes, there are mental health disorders that are a little bit more maybe evident within social behavior. So you might think automatically of the dramatic sort of person talking to themselves on the street corner, but it can be that, but it is not always that. And it often is that invisible illness, that invisible battle that we have that nobody really notices. And so you're saying, I grew up with mental illness. I did. The very first time, if I'm very transparent, that I mentioned wanting to die, I was 10 years old. And my friend's mother overheard me and then told my mother. And my mom offered for me to go speak to someone, but I'm 10. I'm terrified to speak to a stranger. It doesn't feel like something that's going to be comfortable. So I say no. And she doesn't push. And I don't blame her for that at all. Parents do the best they can with what they're equipped with. And it comes with a lot of love and a lot of compassion. So she just didn't want to push me into something that would make me uncomfortable. And so I grew up from that young age knowing that what I felt was different than what a lot of people were feeling, but not knowing why or that there was a name for it. Just these experiences of thinking, maybe I'm not trying hard enough. Maybe there's just something different about me and I need to try harder to be normal, to be different, to be better. And so I saw it as a flaw in character rather than literally a medical condition. And it took many years, well into my teens and my early 20s, to start actually gaining the knowledge to understand what was happening and seeking the support that I needed for it. Thankfully enough, in my teenage years, I had a very close, good group of friends that was kind of like a buffer for my symptoms. So a lot of what I deal with in terms of symptoms, I am diagnosed with both bipolar disorder and borderline personality disorder. And a lot of those symptoms can come to a head within the teenage years, but I had this great buffer of very close supportive friends. And so everything kind of came out for me in my late teens, early 20s. And that's when I realized, and more so the people around me could see it more now, that there was something going on and I needed some support and we had to figure out what was happening. And so when I received my diagnoses, many people can feel like a diagnosis is a negative label, especially because, as I mentioned before, that stigma that exists around mental illness. But for me, it was kind of like a breath of fresh air. I realized there's a name for what I've been experiencing, which means it's not my fault. It's something that happens to people. It's something that people are aware of. There's treatment for it. There's hope here. So that label didn't feel negative to me, but I know that it does for many people. It just sort of made me see the logic in what was happening. And then from that point, it was starting that process of recovery, which can be very difficult when there is a lack of understanding around mental illness. I didn't even know half of what I should have known about my own disorders. And then thinking of how little other people in my world, in my bubble, just in society in general, know, just creates a lot of judgment, which then gets internalized as shame and you blame yourself for it. So it was really interesting to see both sides of that diagnosis. But for me, it really did become the catalyst for that recovery journey and finding the treatment for what I was dealing with. And I can delve into it a little bit more later as well, but it was not a straight line of a journey of recovery. It's not linear. There are steps forwards and backwards, and it's a very complex journey that we undertake that's very individual to each person that undertakes it. And for me, there are definitely steps forwards and many steps backwards. But when I look at it now, from the point of getting that diagnosis to where I am today, I have such an understanding of what it is that I deal with and of myself within those illnesses and where it stands within my identity. It's not all of who I am, but it is part of who I am. And it's something that has really informed how I see the world, how I interact with people, how I do the work that I do, why I do the work that I do. So it's been from that point of being 10 years old and having that very first suicidal thought, it's been a really long, complex journey that in the end has brought me a lot of empowerment, actually.
Okay, there's a lot there. In a good way. In a good way. That was amazing. Thank you for sharing that. So there's a few things I want to unpack. The first thing is dealing with that as a child, as a 10-year-old. obviously you didn't know what was going on, right? And I think it's interesting because I don't want to compare, but I've always had anxiety. Like anxiety has been a part of my life most of my life. And as a kid, it used to manifest with a lot of physical symptoms. Like if I got nervous, I would get my stomach would feel upset, I'd get shaky, like, and it was a thing. But as a kid, you're just like, okay, that's just the way it is. You know what I mean? It sucks, but it is what it is. But then you realize, like, as you get older and as life gets more complicated, suddenly these issues become more complicated, right? The triggers become much more intense, and
Mhm.
the capacity for disrupting your life becomes much higher also, right? And I think that for you, as you kind of grew up with this, I then love that you said, sometimes a label might seem like a negative, but when you don't know what the hell's going on with you, and then suddenly there's an explanation for it, suddenly it's like, oh, it's a thing. Other
Mhm.
people have this. I'm not alone in the world. I'm not, and I can't help but think that that's almost like, okay, good. And then there's a possibility for treatment. There's a possibility for help. Now
Yeah.
it's like I have a name for this. I know what's going on.
Mhm.
It's complicated and it sucks and whatever, but at least I can make sense of things now versus this weird vacuum of not knowing, right? Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so yeah, and you say like it helps to know, but that's just it. Like once you know, okay, now I can actually do something about this,
Yeah.
which I think that is so important. And I also like that you said there is no face to mental illness. And I think that that is such an important thing for people to remember, because I think that, so many people struggle with it on different levels. I think that there's
Mhm.
an incredibly like large spectrum of where you can fall. Like you said, like, yeah, obviously that person talking to themselves on the bus, that's a more obvious
Yeah.
face of mental illness. But then I guarantee you that half the people on that bus are facing some sort of mental health adversity, probably, right? And at different levels.
Mhm.
So once you had that diagnosis, what was next for you? How do you then deal with that? Is it, is there treatment? Is there therapy? Is it medication? Is it a combination of all those things? And what was that journey like for you? And I'm only asking because I think a lot of people who aren't sure about what's going on in their lives, it might help them to know that, this is what it looks like. This is the steps that it takes to eventually get to a better place.
Yeah, for sure. It's something that has to start with something small. So that diagnosis, both those diagnoses came after my brother actually made an appointment for me with a psychologist who just happened to be quite an expert on borderline personality disorder, which was a perfect coincidence. But um, it's that first step of reaching out for help and understanding that that's a sign of strength and not a sign of weakness. And from there, it's about really exploring what options are going to be best for you. And I really believe in being an advocate for yourself within mental health care. There is no x-ray, blood test, etc. for mental illness. It's all based on what you can communicate of what you're feeling. And so you have to be your own advocate to say, sure, I'll try this, but if it doesn't work, I'm going to let you know and we're going to make an adjustment. So it was an exploration of, like you said, there's therapy, there's medication. I delved into both. And with borderline personality disorder, there is a type of therapy called dialectical behavior therapy. And that's what's been research has shown as the most effective in terms of changing the behaviors, the thought patterns, the symptoms that come along with that disorder. And medication was also helpful for me because it's an interesting combination that I live with because BPD is going to exhibit sort of cycles of mood disturbances that are very up and down on a shorter cycle because it's usually based on some sort of social trigger. Whereas bipolar disorder is mood disturbances on that same up and down cycle on a longer term basis, and it's more based on a chemical imbalance. So, behavioral therapy can work very well for those symptoms of BPD, but medication can be more helpful with the bipolar disorder because it's a little bit more straightforward. The chemicals in your brain need to be kind of adjusted. And some people do treat and live with bipolar disorder with no medication. And if that's their choice and that works for them, I think that's amazing. For me, it took about 10 years to find the right combination of medications that worked for me. And the way that I look at it now is that the medication gives me a more stable baseline from which to then do the personal work myself. It just kind of gives me a leg up so I'm not so deep in that dark hole. So I'm very grateful that I found the medication that works for me. There's absolutely no shame in taking medication. There's no shame in saying meds are not for me. It's whatever works for you in your situation. So for me, it was a combo of meds and therapy. And therapy was something that I was at times hesitant about, at times resistant about. I had to really learn myself and learn to open up and understand that mental illness is not my fault and I'm not to blame. It is, however, my responsibility to manage my symptoms so that I'm not affecting other people negatively, so that I'm not dragging myself into unhealthy behaviors. That's up to me. Nobody can do that for me. So I had to really learn to realize that as I did all this therapy. And the most intense bout of therapy that I did was a 5-month inpatient program where I lived at the facility with 9 other women who also had borderline personality disorder. And we had group therapy, personal therapy, art therapy, all kinds of things that we did to learn how to better manage our symptoms. And I ended up at that program because I am very privileged that my mother was able to pay for a private treatment program, because we know how the wait lists are in the public mental health care system and how difficult it can be to access services. So I'm very lucky that that was a possibility for me. It saved my life. That program is something I went into after 2 very severe suicide attempts within 1 month. And we determined when I was in the psychiatric ward that I I could not go home to the toxic relationship I was in. I couldn't go home to my mother because it wasn't fair to expect her to be equipped to keep me safe. And I couldn't go live anywhere on my own because I wasn't safe. So we found a solution, which was this program, which, like I said, saved my life. It taught me so many tools and strategies to coping with what I'm faced with, dealing with my struggles, my challenges, and finding that hope again, and realizing that I was glad that those attempts weren't successful. And it took a little while to get to that point. But of course, now I can tell you I'm very glad that that didn't work and that I'm still here, because I feel like I do have a lot to contribute and a lot to offer based on everything that I've lived through. So it's really amazing to sort of get that second chance after you're so deep in that darkness that you don't think there's going to be a way out.
Okay. Just going to take a minute there to process all that. I didn't know any of that. So, well, I'm very happy too that you are
Thank you.
here and that we get to talk today about all of this and hopefully help other people kind of
Mhm.
along their journey. Something I wanted to come back to when you mentioned how the BPD,
Mhm.
borderline personality disorder. First of all, could you maybe just give a quick explanation about what that is? I think bipolar, most people understand what
Yeah.
that means, right? Like the manic and the depression and
Mhm.
the ups and downs and all of that. And I'm like, I don't want this to be an educational thing on different mental health issues. But I think borderline personality disorder is just something I don't really understand. So maybe if
Mhm.
you could just give a quick like overview of what that is, and then we can kind of maybe talk about a few other things related
Yeah,
to that.
absolutely. It is a little bit less well known. People are less familiar with personality disorders. There's 3 categories of them essentially, and BPD is one of them. And it is very, very interpersonal. The symptoms are very much based on the way that you interact with people and social behaviors that you have. So it is sort of characterized with identity disturbances, sort of a feeling of emptiness, lack of identity, um, very reactive in terms of interpersonal behaviors. So being very, here's the thing, BPD is very stigmatized within the medical community and the mental health care community because we are often considered to be problematic, manipulative, attention seeking clients, which to me is an exaggeration. I don't believe that we are purposefully manipulative. We're simply asking for our needs to be met in the best way that we know how, which is not always super healthy. And there is often a lot of self harm and suicidal thoughts that come along with BPD, which is where the attention seeking sort of stereotype stems from. But essentially, what it is that you will have a trigger, usually something interpersonal or social, and then the intensity of emotion goes up. But the way that our brains work based on either trauma or upbringing, things like that, the cooling down period back to a neutral mood is much slower. So before we can go back to neutral, inevitably there's going to be another trigger, and then it'll keep skyrocketing as it just cannot reach back to neutral and keeps going up and up. So it's a lot of very intense moods, intense emotions. It kind of feels, the way that I like to describe it, is like a constant emotional sunburn. Everything just kind of hurts a little and scratches too much and you're too sensitive to it. It's kind of like that.
Okay, that makes a little bit of sense. Um, and then something else you said. So you said that BPD is much more behavioral, meaning
Hmm.
that it's less easy to just like say, oh, that's exactly what it is, right? And then
Yeah.
you mentioned that bipolar is much more neurochemical,
Hmm.
right? And more easily dealt with through medications.
Yeah.
Um, but then you also said something is you really need to be an advocate for yourself when it comes to mental health. And I think that's incredible that you have that perspective and that you have that ability to be an advocate. But what I would think is that for a lot of people, it's hard to advocate for yourself when you're going through a mental health issue because you're not necessarily the best person to be thinking in that way. Does that make sense? Like I'm just
Yeah.
thinking someone who's struggling right now, it's really difficult, I would think, first of all, to go up against a system that's, I think you, like you said, you got very lucky, right? That your mother was able to get you into this program and all those things. Because I think for so many people, if they're just dealing with what's available, let's say in a public health system that's broken in so many ways right now,
Mhm.
that must be really hard. Like, first of all, even advocating for yourself is difficult enough. Advocating for yourself with a mental health issue must be even more difficult. And then advocating for yourself with a mental health issue with a system that's probably really hard to deal with, like that must be just such a struggle for so many people. So what are ways, if you had to recommend anything to anyone, like what are ways that you can advocate for yourself? Is there anything that you've learned along the way that really helped you to just be better for your, like just make things easier for yourself? Is there anything you can think of?
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely important to have people in your corner. It's easier to speak up for yourself when somebody's standing next to you and you feel that energy of, I'm here for you, I believe you, I'm behind you. So really finding those close people that you can trust, if it's anything from uh, calling a psychologist to make an appointment or taking yourself to the ER because it's that serious, having somebody you really trust with you is going to really help. Um, it takes a lot, like you're saying, it is difficult when you're already dealing with mental health concerns to then advocate for yourself. It takes a lot of self-awareness and sort of radical honesty with yourself, which is something that can be worked on and nurtured. And I think it's also important to both understand the limitations of that healthcare system that we have to deal with and to know how to reach for every resource available. So if you can find the strength to leave no stone unturned, there are distress centers where you can speak to trained volunteers for free. There are clinics in the city that offer sliding scale or free therapy. Yes, it's usually there's a wait list or it might just be walk-ins only or whatever the case may be, but it's still an option. There's a lot of resources out there, and finding the strength to really go dig them out and find what it is that's going to help you. For example, if you're, say, a trans teenager and you go to the ER because you're feeling suicidal and you don't feel supported, it's going to be difficult when you're in that dark a place. But if you do some research, there are some communities and some groups that are going to be trans inclusive. Like whatever it is that you're dealing with that makes you unique, there's going to be services and communities that welcome you for that and have the support that you need. It just takes a little bit of digging. So it's really important to be aware that there are other options than just, this person is suicidal, call the police, or this person is self-harming, let's go to the ER. There are other options out there. We just have to be aware of them and go looking for them.
Yeah. So find your people.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
what,
Absolutely.
and lately I've just been exploring some of the different platforms out there, especially towards anxiety and stress management and all that. And I stumbled upon a few Facebook groups that I have to say I'm really impressed with.
Nice.
And I think it's more that, so I'm just reading through these posts and I'm kind of following what people are doing on these pages and in these groups. And it's as simple as, hey, I can't sleep, borderline panic attack. Is anyone listening? I could really use someone to chat with. And then just to see the explosion of comments of people that are there, just, hey, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here. And then it gives that person an opportunity to connect potentially with strangers that she's never met or he's never met. But knowing that someone's there to walk you through that process or to give you advice or to, and so I'm just mentioning that because I think sometimes it's as simple as just, looking on Facebook and you might actually find the
Sure.
people that you need to be supported, right? And I
Mhm.
know that there's a lot of online resources as well now where if you can't actually physically get somewhere,
Mhm.
you can get therapy online. You can, there's so, especially after COVID, where almost
Yeah.
everything has gone online at this point. Um, I think that people need to remember that. So let's kind of segue here. I would really like to dive into the other aspects of your life. And so for me, a big part of my dealing with my own anxiety issues has been movement and breath. It's
Mhm.
been what saved me. And when I say saved, look, it's hard sometimes for me to talk about it because I feel like there's people who are so much worse off.
Mhm.
And I think that's part of the problem, right? I think part of the problem is unless you feel like it's extremely disruptive in your life, like you shouldn't even talk about it. Like,
Yeah.
you get what I'm saying? Like for me, a big part of it also was as a martial arts teacher, as someone who meditates all the time. I was like, well, if I come out and start talking about my own anxiety, I'm going to seem weak and I'm going to seem like someone who, how can I possibly help others if I can't even help myself? And you start to play these games in your mind. And then you realize, like, no, it's the opposite. It's
Mhm.
the fact that you've gone through it that makes you the best person to help others,
Yeah.
right? Because you're not just learning from a book, you're learning from experience. And I think that is such a powerful tool to say, hey, I had this issue. This is how I help myself. So maybe I can help you too.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's exactly what you're able to do now because you've gone through it, because you've
Mhm.
sought out all the different things that worked and didn't work.
Yeah.
You're in a really good place right now to help others do the same thing. But I would like to dive into, because if I'm not mistaken, you're still practicing
Yeah.
Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, which at the time when we knew each other, you were starting off, I think,
Just
pretty
starting
much
out. Yeah.
just starting off. And and I think that the fact that you stuck to that, it probably has something to do with the fact that you recognize that it was part of your journey, right? I think that as someone who also uses martial arts as such a way of a form of therapy, honestly,
Mhm.
I'd like to dive into that part of it for you. I'd like to see where that kind of, and what other aspects. I remember also when we knew each other, you were very adventurous, right? Like there was always these pictures of you like standing up on top of a cliff, or like you had this kind of, and that's where like now when you mention bipolar, I can almost like
Mhm.
connect some of the parts of your personality that I knew back then. I was like, okay, that actually makes sense.
Right.
You know what I mean? And not in a bad way, but just like,
Mhm.
because there was an intensity to you. I always
Right.
remember like, and I also remember you breaking down every once in a while in the gym for no reason. And I'm like, huh, what's wrong with her?
Yeah.
So maybe talk a little bit about that. Like, where does martial arts fit in your life? How has it helped you? And how do you think it connects with everything you've been through?
It's very interesting that you say that there's sort of this intensity to me because essentially I feel like it's both part of my personality and who I am and part of the illnesses that everything I feel is magnified, is on that next level. Everything is huge for me and everything has to be go big or go home, and that's part of both of those sides of just who I am naturally and having those illnesses and experiencing those. And I found that martial arts was the perfect sort of channel for that because it puts you in uncomfortable situations where you have to be vulnerable, where you have to push through when you think you have nothing left. All these lessons that it teaches you. And for me, it became both, like you said, a sort of therapy. It helped me work through a lot of what I was experiencing, but it also brought out some of my symptoms and what I was experiencing. It made me more anxious at times. It made me more almost having a panic attack. It made me more down on myself and lack of identity and am I good enough? And should somebody take this purple belt off of my waist? I don't deserve it. All of those things that I feel in every other aspect of my life are almost sort of um, just focused on by jujitsu and the way that it puts you in these positions and these situations and these opportunities for growth. So it was a parallel journey between the mental health recovery and my sort of growing up as a martial artist. But it also brought things to light that I realized I needed to work on more. And one of those things that's really huge for me, I remember actually I was at a tournament once and I was fighting this girl and I lost. I forget how I lost, maybe a lot of points. It wasn't great. I lost that match. And because of the way the tournament was structured and how few women there were, I was set to fight her again. And my coach told me, you know what you did wrong in that fight? And I was like, I don't know, everything. And he's like, no, you didn't believe. Every time you would do a technique, I could see that you didn't believe that you could do it. So you gave up halfway or didn't put in as much effort as you would have if you truly had that belief that I'm good at this and I can do this. And so I fought this girl again and I tried to keep this in my mind. And every time I did a technique, if I sat up for a kimura, if I went for a collar grip, I just told myself 300%, you can do this. You're capable of doing this. Just do it. And I won that time. And it was just wild, the mentality difference, what it did to my game in under an hour. And it's something that I still struggle with, that belief in myself, that confidence, not having the doubts. I go to a new academy just to visit and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, are they going to wonder why I have a purple belt after they spar with me for the first time? And that's, to a degree, that's just nuts. I mean, somebody has seen me grow into the sport for years and then awarded me a belt. I need to respect the fact that he believes I deserve that belt. And if I don't have that belief in myself, I'm just going to keep digging that hole deeper and deeper. And that is what I do sometimes. And the journey of realizing that jujitsu is about what you're learning, but also knowing that there's always so much more to learn, it just put me in these positions to really reframe a lot of it and dig deeper within myself to find what it is that I'm made of, what I can push through. And if I can push through a fight in a competition where somebody is on top of my chest and I genuinely feel like I will die because I can't breathe and I'm panicking. And then I go home and 2 days later, I'm home alone and I'm feeling suicidal. And I think, okay, I got through that. The panic that I'm feeling now, I can get through this as well. Use the same tools. It's the breath, it's the mindset, it's the finding that self-awareness to be like, why are these thoughts coming up and are they serving a purpose for me? So it's very similar in the way that your brain runs through it to get you through those situations.
Yeah. Okay. There's a lot there. So the first thing you talked about that I really wanted to dive into is how in that first match you didn't believe in yourself, and then as soon as you allowed the belief to take over, you won the match. And a big part of what I do is help people tap into flow states, right?
Right.
And a flow state is where you give in to your belief, basically, right? And jujitsu is an amazing example of that because flow is basically where you start performing at your best because you're running on instinct, because
Right.
you shut off the part of your brain that's thinking. And that's where doubt comes from, right?
Right.
Any type of doubt, any type of stress, anxiety, it all comes from the prefrontal cortex where we're basically processing all the different possibilities.
Mhm.
And basically, in someone who is inclined towards negative thinking, it's all the possibilities of defeat. It's all the possibilities of what could go wrong.
Yeah.
And as long as you're operating with those thought processes going, there's no way you can perform at your best. It's impossible. Right. But then as soon as you just started believing in your abilities, what you're basically doing is you're letting your instincts take over. This
Mhm.
is where the years and years and years of training that it took you to get that purple belt, that's where those years get to take over.
Right.
Right. And that's the best you. That's the best version of you.
Mhm.
Right. And I think the more often you can allow yourself to tap into that part of you, it transcends the martial arts. And that's
Mhm.
exactly what you were saying, is that the next time you're at home by yourself having a panic attack or having suicidal thoughts, and you can suddenly go back to that moment when you had this woman on top of you and it felt like you weren't going to be able to get through it, and you did, and you suddenly realize like, hey, this lesson that I learned, this physical lesson that I learned, I can apply that to all these different parts of my life. Right. And I think that's so important for people to create positive challenges for themselves,
Mhm.
right? To put ourselves in those situations where, yes, it feel like you might die when someone's on top of you with jujitsu, but let's we know that that's not
Yeah.
possible, right? Well, at least we hope so. But
Yeah.
basically, that's why these sports are a
Mm.
safe way to tap into that,
Yeah.
right? In my last podcast I did with my friend Max, who's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, we talked specifically about that. Is that you're placing yourself in a situation where ultimately you could die. Like if there wasn't any refs, if there wasn't any rules, and you feel that person on top of you and they're sinking in that choke, and you realize like if there were no rules to this,
Yeah.
I'm done, you know? And that fear is something you learn to navigate. It's something you learn to deal with
Yeah.
on a level that allows you to do it safely, right?
Yeah.
But my gosh, how it can transcend into other aspects of your life, I think is so valuable, especially for someone who deals with whatever stress, anxiety, or any other type of mental health issue. Now, obviously, I think some people would probably maybe have a really hard time at first
Mhm.
dealing with some of that, but I think depending on who you are, I think that's just such an amazing tool to deal with it, right?
Yeah, I completely agree. And it is true, like you said, there are sort of um, things to be wary of. Somebody who's, say, a survivor of abuse, there might be some triggers there that are difficult for them to deal with. But I would still be a proponent of them trying to stick it through. If we're talking about a woman, maybe explore women's only classes to start with. There's always ways to work your way up. And I think that anyone can find a variant to benefit from the fact that martial arts puts you in these positions and teaches you these lessons, because there will be no growth if there's no discomfort. And for those of you listening who have not done Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, trust me, there's discomfort. Oh my gosh. So it's just all these positions that you're in where you're feeling vulnerable. And like you said, it becomes a little bit primal, because we do get in positions where if there are no rules, yes, I'm done right now. This is it. This person has complete control. And that puts you in a mindset where you really realize what you're able to push through. And like I was saying, then you can translate that and harness that into other challenges in your life. So martial arts, I mean, I started when I was a kid with karate, and already that was incredible for me in terms of the body awareness, the discipline, the confidence of here's what my body can do as opposed to what does it look like, all of these things that I learned. And then it came from that desire to push myself and find out what I can actually survive and get through, that I started seeking out Muay Thai, because I wanted something more full contact, more realistic, that would put me in more of those vulnerable positions, and positions where I feel like my battery's dead, but I have to give just a little bit more. And then that passion grew into a curiosity for MMA, which made me feel like I needed jujitsu. And then I kind of fell in love with jujitsu and branched off to just that. But it was seeking out the next challenge. Karate was something that I don't want to say conquered. Like I said, there's always something more to learn, and black belt is just the beginning. But once I got my black belt in karate, I thought, okay, I need to branch out into something a little bit different that's going to push me even more. And that's where Muay Thai came in. And it's, I mean, I remember sparring, and just when I think about it now, I realize how connected it was to my mental health. But back then I didn't realize. All I knew was, oh my gosh, I'm taking one more punch in the face. Can I take one more? There's another round after this. Oh my gosh, can I do that? Yes, just take it one punch to the face at a time. Just withstand one. And then maybe the next one you'll be able to block it, or you'll withstand another and then you'll block the next one. But it's always pushing yourself a little bit more, but taking it one step at a time. And that was where that understanding of the way martial arts can do that really came from. And then I explored it so much more when I delved into jujitsu more specifically.
Yeah, and I think you kind of pointed it out, but if someone's seeking to try a martial art, especially for all the lessons we're talking about, I think what's beautiful, and you know, like I taught Muay Thai for many years. But that said, I think that with jujitsu, you're dealing with a much safer environment to
Mhm.
challenge yourself,
Absolutely.
right? Not to say that you can't get hurt in jujitsu, you definitely can.
Mhm.
However, I think there's a big difference between, you know, the end of your challenge being that you're tapping out because someone has you in a chokehold
Yeah.
versus getting punched in the face over and over again to see how many punches you can withstand. I don't think that's high on anyone's list really as a fun
No,
thing to do, right? And it
no.
takes a special kind of stupid sometimes to be willing to take that on. And you know, and then look, I love Muay Thai, I always will, but
Mhm.
if we're talking therapeutic
Oh,
endeavors,
absolutely, yeah.
I really think something like jujitsu. And I sometimes wonder why I never got really into jujitsu. And a big part of it, honestly, was just there's just so many things you can do. The other part was that for whatever reason, my body had a really hard time with jujitsu. I constantly got injured, my neck,
Yeah.
my shoulders, and these were injuries that would last a long time,
Mhm.
like getting your arm wrenched. And it was also that I would often roll with people who were like, haha, I'm going to show the Muay Thai teacher what I can do. And they would go
Yeah.
extra hard and try to prove something. I'm like, dude, you don't need to do
Yeah.
that. Like, it's all good. The other thing you said, I just wanted to come back to, is how you said, like, I walk into a gym for the first time and wonder, are they going to know that, do I deserve this purple belt? Am I a fraud? Blah, blah, blah. I
Mhm.
guarantee you that so many people have those exact same thoughts, right?
Yeah.
No matter how good you are, no matter how much you've invested into whatever art form it is you're working at, you always have those moments of doubt. I remember even as a Muay Thai teacher, it made it even worse because I would spar with anyone. I'm like, I'm a teacher of this. If
Right.
I don't look amazing, like, people are going to doubt my abilities. And like, I think everyone has that conversation with themselves. What
Mhm.
happens though is once you're on the mats or once you're in the ring, if you can let flow take over, if you can let your instincts and your skill level take over, that's where all those doubts kind of go out the window, right? Because you have to prove it to yourself first and realize that no one's actually judging you. You're the only one really judging yourself at that point,
Yeah.
right? And so now I'd like to talk about the work that you do, right? So we know about your past, we know about martial arts, and now I'd like to talk about the work that you do now, because I think it's really important work, and I think it's important that people know. I think it's important people know what you do. So why don't we dive into that? So when you say you're a speaker,
Mhm.
what does that look like? Like, if you're invited to a speaking engagement, what does that
Yeah.
look like?
Well, first of all, thank you. I really appreciate the interest and the support for what I do. It really means a lot because it's actually tattooed on one of my wrists. It says, always give more than you take. And that's what I aim to do. Despite the fact that it is a business and I'm making a living, my true aim is for support and connection and helping. And part of that is with the speaking engagements that I do, like you just said. And that can be a variety of things. I have spoken for TEDx at McGill, which is sort of a very specific format and type of approach. I have given talks or speeches for events, fundraisers, that type of thing. Or I'll do presentations for organizations, for companies, for their staff, different types of workshops. I have spoken in middle and high schools are one of my favorites. It's really great to connect with youth. That's always been super rewarding. Colleges are great as well because students are just sort of exploring the beginning of their career. And if I'm speaking to classes of people who are studying helping professions, it really helps sort of ignite that fire for them and have a better understanding of how mental health works into all of it. So that's been really great too. Um, it's been a little weird with COVID having to do so many speaking engagements virtually because that energy and that engagement of having a crowd in front of you is just so unique. And I love connecting with people that way. But I'm grateful that I can still do what I do during these times. So it's been nice to have sort of a variety of clients in terms of different companies, different events that are looking for an open and honest talk about mental health.
That's awesome. And so I would like to talk about the youth,
Yeah.
because I think that, first of all, I think before COVID, we were underestimating how intense the mental health issue is at that age, right? I think that there's, because I think, again, it's the lack of conversation or the difficulty of having those conversations, right? If you admit to any of this, especially as a teenager, when already peer pressure and all those things are already really difficult, to then admit to any type of mental health issue would just make things worse. So I think a lot of kids just hold it in, right? They hold on to those things and don't want anyone to know that they're having problems, that they're having a hard time. And then if we throw COVID into the mix, where suddenly we're, first of all, for a lot of kids, from what I understand, is we're removing potentially a support system, right?
Right.
So for a lot of kids, going to school and seeing their friends made things easier. Maybe speaking to the school counselor on a
Yeah.
regular basis made things easier. And suddenly they're at home isolated. And not only are they isolated, but they're isolated for this really scary reason,
Yeah.
I think like as soon as lockdown started and all that, I think, the stress level in society just skyrocketed. So imagine someone who's already up here.
Yeah.
I mean, it must push people to this level that they weren't even ready for, right?
Yeah.
And so, and especially with kids, where suddenly, and then add, you know, especially for kids, let's say that are only children and they're at home alone or alone with their parents and they can't get out. And so, have you experienced any of that? Like, is that an opportunity that you've had to speak to youths in that capacity? And what's your take on how COVID has affected kids? And when I say kids, I mean kids, teenagers, anyone
Yeah.
that kind of falls into that. And also, what are ways that that we can help and be of service to that community to make sure that they're getting the support that they need?
Right. I actually spoke to a youth group last week. It was a really great group of kids. And we did talk a lot about that sense of community and that connectedness and how important it is to continue fostering that despite the fact that maybe physically we're not together. It's really important to be checking in with people, to be taking the time to connect, to check in on the people who seem like they're fine. Usually that can be a lot of people who are struggling and they just put on that brave face and they're the strong friend and nobody checks in on them, they check in on everybody else. So I really emphasize that with this youth group, this sense of community and the fact that we're not meant to do it alone and we're meant to be supports for each other and to really find empathy and non-judgment when talking to people about anything mental health or mental illness related. And I think that when it comes to the current situation, it's just sort of exacerbating things that teens and kids are already dealing with. And it's kind of emphasizing stressors that existed before that are just now even more difficult to deal with. And you're right, the situation that many youth are faced with right now is that the people that they trust the most or the closest with, they don't have access to them, or just even their social bubble and their different environment. um, I mean, I hate to say it, but let's just be honest, not every home is the best environment for every kid out there. And when they're now stuck at home with their parents who potentially could go from anywhere on the spectrum to just not really present and misunderstanding to just downright abusive, these are realities of what's going on right now. And so there's no escape from that. And there's more difficulty in finding those moments of connectedness. So, really, trying to check in with people, connect with people as much as you can, pick up the phone instead of sending a text, just little things like that to find that connection is really important. And I think that as adults and parents and guardians, what we can do for what youth are experiencing right now is first and foremost find that non-judgmental empathy and really be there to listen. It's really important to meet, especially youth, where they are emotionally. Don't try to bring them to the place that you're in. It's about where they are. If they're in a dark hole where there's no hope, don't silver line it for them. Just bear witness to that and be there with them and honor the space that they're in. And that doesn't mean commiserate and make it worse and put more negative ideas in their head. It just means don't try to impose this toxic positivity of no, buck up, everything's fine. No, their feelings are valid. Those difficult, dark feelings are allowed and valid, and you have to feel them and process them before you can move on to making it better. Because there is a place for making it better. You can't just stay in the darkness forever, but you have to experience it first and sort of ride it out before you can move on to the solution. And I encourage anyone from a child and their guardian to a romantic partnership or a friendship to use the phrase support or solution when you're asking for somebody to help you out. So I find this with clients that I have that are in couples and romantic partnerships. It's been really helpful to tell the partner, I want support right now, or I want a solution right now, and they know exactly what to provide. And that's the problem, is many people jump right to solutions. So that simple phrase can be a really helpful tool to really determining what's needed in that moment so you can provide the best support possible, because the two have very different impacts on someone's mental health, whether you're just offering support or you're gunning for a solution, trying to find the way to make it better. And like I said, there is a place for that. It's just not always the first thing to jump to.
Yeah, that's really powerful. Because sometimes you just need someone to talk to and to listen, right?
Hmm.
It's like sometimes you even have to like start that conversation with, I don't really want your ideas right now. I
Yeah.
just need you to let me empty my mind, right? Almost like
Mhm.
someone who's like a physical diary in a way where you get to
Yeah.
like just kind of work through the problems. And so as a parent, I I faced that moment a few times with my son, especially
Mhm.
as he got to be older, 13, 14. And suddenly there's like these mood swings and there's these things going on where it's so easy for me to just go straight to the frustration and
Mhm.
be like, ugh, why is he being such an idiot? Or why is he being this
Yeah.
way? Or and then getting upset and then getting into arguments and then taking a step back. And luckily I have a wife who's extremely level-headed and who recognizes these moments a little bit sooner than I do.
Right.
But I also have the tool of meditation, which often gives me that moment to just take a step back and to create a new perspective on what I'm observing.
Mhm.
And often I found that those moments where we were at odds with each other and there was disruption or whatever, if I just dug a little bit underneath the surface, the reason came out. And it
Right.
had nothing to do with me. It had nothing to do with that actual thing we were arguing about. And it had something to do with things he was going through or frustrations that he had about school or his friends or like rarely have I noticed that there's just a like there's always something below the surface. And
Mhm.
sometimes the person who's experiencing it doesn't even know.
Right.
Like, why am I so upset? What's going on? Right. And I think that there's so many levels to this that we need to be careful to not just, judge a book by its cover, basically.
Absolutely.
Like if someone's really upset, okay, they're upset at this stupid thing and it might seem stupid to you, but maybe that's not really what they're upset at. There might be other, and then if we get into mental health issues and depression and all that, like that hole can go really, really deep.
Oh yeah.
And like you said, like sometimes the strong person is the one who really needs to be asked, how are you?
Mhm.
Because there's people who just take it and they take it and they take it. And then at some point it cracks. Yeah.
Yeah.
And at some point you're the one who needs the help. But because you're the strong one, you're afraid to ask for help
Yeah.
because everyone comes to you. And if you let people know that you also need help, then it might make you look weak. And
Yeah.
there you go. Right. And then that weird, crazy thought cycle starts. And I
Yeah.
think that's where it can get really difficult. And so only because this is a big, big part of what I do and what I teach is the breath and how
Mhm.
powerful breathing can be. Now, obviously, it's not, a cure all for sure, but I think that, for me, meditation was, yeah, it saved me in so many different ways. I'd be curious to know if you have any experience with that or if it's something that you've looked into or any of those things. I'd just like to maybe take a couple minutes and talk about breathing and meditation.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that I have looked into, that I've started getting more familiar with. I honestly don't really know why I overlooked it for so long. I think it may have been a fear that I just was going to notice myself not being good at it. But I know that there is no good. It's just about the journey of getting more comfortable with it and what you figure out about yourself as you do it. But I had this sort of misconception of, okay, if I can't sit there for 35 minutes with a clear mind, then I may as well just not even try. And so it was a little bit daunting to try it out, but I've started the journey with sort of your basic like guided meditations that you can find on apps, or I have friends who are meditation teachers, that type of thing. So that's been really helpful to have a voice kind of reminding me, especially when the reminders are things like, okay, so you saw a thought pop up and you started sort of obsessing over it. Just accept that that happened. Now let it go and just keep going. And having that reminder, that um, sort of audible reminder in my head, was really helpful, as opposed to just right away sitting there by myself going, okay, so what is meditation? What does it mean? What do I do? What am I doing right now? And just all of the doubt coming back up. So I've tried it with my fiance. We've done a few guided meditations together, and I don't know sort of what the belief or purpose or what like your view is on when you're doing it with someone else in the room with you, but I found that focusing on his breath actually calmed me down and helped me focus on mine, because it was sort of like a focus point instead of this nebulous clear mind of, am I thinking of something? What should I be thinking of? What's going on? So having that anchor point of the breath of somebody that I trust just sort of gave me that catalyst for focusing on mine more. So I'm a super beginner, but I do see the power in it very much.
Yeah. So I think it's interesting because with meditation, like you said, first of all, if you're not able to sit there with a clear mind for 30 minutes, you failed, you know, like competitive meditation,
Yeah.
right? Um, but that's the biggest misconception for so many people who try,
Mhm.
assume that that's the only way you can do it, and therefore if that's not achieved, they failed and they give up on it.
Right.
And the other thing I would say is that what you mentioned about having someone else in the room or having a guided meditation, the reason I think that that's such a great way to start is, especially if you're someone who deals with stress or anxiety or depression,
Mhm.
your thoughts are one of the biggest things working against you, right? You know, like for me, anxiety was all about just being in my head and just playing out these worst case scenarios and all the things that could go wrong and all this stuff. So if I'm in that state of mind and I just close my eyes and start breathing, even if I'm breathing, those thoughts don't just go away. And
Mhm.
I've had moments, especially in the beginning, where they would get worse because
Right.
sitting there in quiet with these same thoughts that have been plaguing me all day, they just speed up and they speed up. And I would open my eyes and be like, whoa, what the, right?
Yeah.
Because I wasn't, I wasn't creating the space that I needed to go in a positive direction.
Right.
So I think that the guided part, even if it's just a recording of someone's voice, it gives you something else to focus on. And I
Mhm.
think the most dangerous part for people in the beginning is they focus on their thoughts. And
Mhm.
as soon as you start to do that without any type of training or experience, it can go in a negative direction if you're not careful.
Yeah.
Or it just makes you give up because it's too hard, right?
Mhm.
It's like, oh, I'm thinking, wait, I'm thinking about not thinking. Does that mean
Yeah.
I'm thinking? Okay, I failed. Okay, I'm done, you know?
Yeah.
And so I think there's ways that you can go around that. One of those ways is exercise, right? So if you use exercise right before you meditate, and that's a big part of yoga, for example, you doing
Mhm.
like a really great yoga flow and then, the shavasana at the end where you just sit
Yeah.
in silence because you've kind of manipulated your neurochemistry in that way, right? So the reason exercise is so addictive is because it makes us feel good. Why? Because we have all these powerful neurochemicals that are produced. We have endorphins, we have cannabinoids, like there's all of this positive neurochemistry that gets created through exercise. And then if you meditate immediately after, you can leverage that and
Right.
send that in a very positive direction. So I'd say that's one trick for people that are starting off is just move a little first to kind of shift your mind in a positive direction, and then it'll just make the meditation so much easier. I'd say the other thing too is set yourself up for success. So say I'm going to meditate for 5 minutes,
Right.
right? Instead of I'm going to sit here like a monk for 30 minutes, because
Yeah.
that's like, it's really hard for anyone, like even people who have tons of experience. So
Yeah.
set yourself up for 5 minutes with a guided meditation. That's it. And just
Yeah.
focus on breathing, and you'll see like, okay, that worked. That was pretty cool. Maybe I can do 10. Maybe I can do 50. Next thing you know, you're in a space where you feel much more confident.
Right.
And I think that more importantly, the best part about meditation, and I'm going to rant on this a bit just because it's such an important thing for me, is that eventually what it becomes is a tool that you constantly have in your back pocket. And I say meditation, what I really mean is the breath, right?
Right.
Meditation is, I think, a word that's pretty loaded for a lot of people because it brings up that idea of I have to sit for 30 minutes like a monk sitting on top of a mountain somewhere. And but breathing is breathing, right? And so the breath is something for me that if I am having a moment, right? If I feel like my mind is shifting into a negative place or in a dark place, or I'm faced with a very stressful situation that I have to deal with,
Mhm.
I know that I'm a few deep breaths away from making it easier because
Right.
I've trained my breath to do that, right? It takes work, it takes training. You don't just get, it's like, just take a deep breath, everything will be fine. Yeah, not so much,
Yeah.
right? But if you've trained yourself to use breathing in that way, it can be such a powerful tool. So that's the thing is, I think if you're going to get into breath training or meditation, think of it that way. Think of it as I'm trained. It's like if you go to the gym all the time to get stronger and then something happens in your life where your strength came in handy, where you had to lift something or whatever, well, that was the moment you were training for, right?
Right.
And like meditation, yes, on its own can be very therapeutic, but it also gives you the ability to then take control of difficult moments when you only have time to take 2 or 3 deep breaths. Like, for example, if you're going out on stage and that makes you really, really nervous, but you know that you can take a few deep breaths right before you walk out and it's going to have this really positive impact. Or something really horrible happens in your life and you feel that panic starting to build up and you're having a hard time, you can close your eyes and take a few deep breaths and be really comfortable with that and ground yourself and take control of that situation or change the perspective on that situation. But anyway, sorry about that. I had to get that out
No,
there, but it's
it's
just,
really helpful for me to hear as somebody who wants to get more into it. It's great to hear that perspective.
yeah, because there's so many resources available. But I also, for me, what's really important is people understand that it's not one thing. Meditation is not the 30-minute monk situation.
Yeah.
It's a tool that can be used in so many different ways. It can be used to achieve mindfulness and higher states of consciousness, and that's amazing. But
Yeah.
that's like level 10. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like level 1 is I can take a few deep breaths to make myself feel better. I
Right.
can listen to some really cool music and just lie on my bed and focus on my breathing. I
Yeah.
can use this as a way to maybe, come up with some new creative ideas or to problem solve.
Hmm.
So there's so many different ways and perspectives that we can use meditation and breath training. And especially I think for mental health, it's just such a powerful tool,
Hmm.
but it has to start at the beginning and it has to start easy and it
Right.
has to start young. And that's why, I think we need to push it in schools. And
Yes.
I think more and more schools are coming on board with it. But
Hmm.
especially now, I think that, it's just and it's an easy thing to do. I don't know if you know who Jay Shetty is, the monk who
I
he
believe
does a
I've
lot of talks. And anyway, really, he's a very big teacher of meditation and breath. And something he said, which was, from the day you were born to the day you die, the only constant is the breath. It's the
right.
one thing that you will always have with you, right? It's
Hmm.
always there, it's always available. And for me, I just think it's such an important tool. And so I think
Hmm.
I wanted to make sure that we brought that up.
Yeah, I think
So
that's really important, and it reminds me of something that I tell my clients a lot, which is to start small and use those baby steps to build progress and build momentum. And I think that that's a much easier way to start a habit and not get discouraged. So I appreciate that you made that very clear. I think it's really important.
okay, so got to start wrapping this up. What's next for you? What's going on? Where? First of all, well, I'll make sure to leave a whole bunch of links, notes, anything you want people to
Oh,
connect
thank
to.
you.
Especially given the nature of this conversation, I think it's important that resources be made available to people who are listening to this. But I'd also like to know what's coming up with you. So where can people connect with you, and what projects do you have coming up, or anything you'd like to share at this point?
Awesome. Thank you. I will continue to do speaking engagements where they're needed, where they're requested, which is always a lot of fun. I'm hoping eventually, I have done that TEDx talk. I'm hoping to do a TED talk on the full TED stage. So that's a big goal of mine. I'm going to keep working towards that. I'm also currently developing an online course for parents to be better equipped to support their teens' mental health. And it's going to be a do from the comfort of your own home from your computer at your own pace 8 module course with video modules. It also includes a lot of cool stuff like 3 one-on-one sessions with me, a weekly community coaching call if that's something that people are interested in. There's a lot of bits and pieces to it that are really meant to support parents in being the best support they can be to their teens, especially right now. As we've talked about, there's so many unique stressors and things that are getting emphasized in terms of stressors right now. So I'm really excited for that project. And that's something that people can find more information about on my website. I try to put updates and sort of new things happening on my website. It's got all the basics of the information, but I try to keep it updated as well. And that's a big project I'm working on right now. But mostly the goal is just to keep that connection going and that open conversation, and any opportunity to do that, whether that's writing for publication or speaking at an event or creating a course like this, whatever I can do to use my experience to reduce stigma and have that candid honest conversation is where I'm going to be headed.
Amazing. Well, Val, I want to take this opportunity to thank you for the work that you do. I think that, first of all, I'm really happy that you seem to be in a really good place. Like I said, we knew each other quite a while ago,
Mhm.
and it's interesting to hear about the journey you've had since then. But I'm really happy to see that you're in a good place. I love always give more than you take. I think that that is such a powerful but simple message, right?
Mhm.
Like if we could all just do that a little bit more, I think it
Yeah.
would be a very different place, very different world. And so, yeah, I'm very happy to see where you are, and thank you for all the amazing work that you do. And I'll make sure to include all the resources, links, anything that you want people to connect with in the notes and the descriptions for this video and everywhere that this will be broadcast. So thanks a lot for taking the time to talk with me, and I look forward to connecting with you in the future.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your support. It means a lot. And thank you for welcoming me in your space today.